Danny Cole was 8 years old, and he lived in a small town in Montana with his mother Linda, who worked long hours at a diner to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Every day after school, Danny walked home through the old hiking trail that wound behind his neighborhood, because it was faster than taking the main road, and he liked the quiet of the forest where he could think and imagine adventures. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the sky was gray and the air smelled like rain was coming soon, so Danny picked up his pace, wanting to get home before the storm hit. That was when he heard something strange coming from the ravine below the trail. It sounded like crying, but not like any crying he had ever heard before, because it was high and musical and filled with so much sadness that it made his heart ache just to listen to it. Danny stopped walking and looked down into the ravine, where thick bushes and fallen logs made it hard to see anything. Clearly, he knew his mother would want him to keep walking and get home safe and not go exploring in places where he might get hurt. But the crying continued, and Danny could not ignore it, because whoever or whatever was making that sound was in pain and needed help. He climbed down carefully, holding on to roots and rocks to keep from slipping on the damp earth, until he reached the bottom of the ravine. The crying was louder now, and it was coming from beneath a fallen log that had been covered with moss and dead leaves. Danny got down on his knees and peered into the dark space under the log, and what he saw made him freeze in place. There was a creature curled up in the shadows, and it was unlike anything he had seen outside of movies and storybooks. It was about the size of a house cat, with scales that shimmered between silver and pale blue, even in the dim light. It had tiny wings pressed flat against its body, and a long tail wrapped around itself, and its eyes were large and golden, and filled with tears that rolled down its small face. Danny knew exactly what he was looking at, even though his brain told him it was impossible. It was a dragon, and it was real, and it was crying. The dragon hatchling saw Danny and flinched backward, pressing itself deeper into the shadows and making a frightened whimpering sound. Danny did not run away, and he did not scream, because even though he was scared, he could see that this creature was more scared than he was. He slowly took off his jacket and held it out gently, speaking in the softest voice he could manage. "Hey there, little one. It is okay. I am not going to hurt you, I promise." The hatchling watched him with those big golden eyes, and Danny could see it was shivering hard, like it had been cold and alone for a very long time. "Come on," Danny whispered. "Let me help you." He moved slowly, reaching toward the dragon with the jacket, and when the glimpse emerged, without the covering, creature did not run. He gently wrapped the warm fabric around its trembling body. The hatchling made a small surprised sound, but it did not fight him, and after a moment it actually leaned into the warmth, like it had been waiting for someone to show it kindness. Danny carefully picked up the dragon and held it against his chest, where it could feel his heartbeat, and he could feel its tiny heart racing with fear. "You are safe now," he said. "I have got you." The dragon looked up at him, and something changed in its eyes, because the fear was still there. But now there was something else too. Hope. Danny did not know where this creature had come from, or why it was alone in a ravine in Montana. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to take care of it. He climbed back up the ravine slowly and carefully, making sure not to jostle the hatchling too much, and by the time he reached the trail, the first drops of rain were starting to fall. Tucked the dragon under his shirt to keep it hidden and dry, and then he ran the rest of the way home. His mother was not back from work yet, which meant Danny had time to figure out what to do. He went straight to his room and closed the door, and then he set the dragon gently on his bed. The hatchling looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the posters on the walls, and the toys on the shelves, and the soft blankets on the bed. Danny went to his closet and started making a nest out of old blankets and sweatshirts, creating a warm, soft space where the dragon could hide and rest. "This can be your home," he told the creature, "at least for now, until I figure out where you came from." The dragon made a small chirping sound and climbed into the nest, curling up in the blankets and finally stopping its shivering. Danny realized the creature was probably hungry, so he snuck downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed some leftover chicken from the fridge. A bowl of water. When he brought the food back to his room, the dragon sniffed it cautiously, and then began to eat with desperate hunger, like it had not had a meal in days. Danny sat on the floor next to the closet and watched the creature eat, and he felt a warmth in his chest that he did not quite understand. He had always wanted a pet, but his mom said they could not afford one, and besides, their landlord did not allow animals in the apartment. But this was different, because this was not just a pet. This was something magical and special, and it had come to him when it needed help the most. "I am going to call you Ember," Danny decided, "because your scales kind of glow like embers in a fire." The dragon looked up at him when he said the name, and made a soft sound, almost like it was agreeing. Danny smiled and reached out slowly to stroke the top of Ember's head, and the dragon leaned into his touch, closing its golden eyes with. Outside, the rain was falling harder now, and thunder rumbled in the distance. But inside Danny's small room, everything felt safe and warm. He did not know that Ember was one of the last surviving members of an ancient species called the Draconeth. He did not know that Ember's mother had been killed by a hostile alien race called the Veth, who hunted dragons for their power. He did not know that Ember's egg had been placed in an escape pod and launched into space as a last desperate attempt to save the bloodline. He did not know that the escape pod had crashed on Earth just a few days ago, and that Ember had hatched alone and terrified in a world completely foreign to her. All Danny knew was that this small creature had been crying and scared and alone, and he had been able to help. And for now, that was enough. As the storm raged outside, Danny sat with Ember and told her about his life, about his mom who worked so hard, where he did not have many friends, about his dreams of someday having adventures. Ember listened to every word, and even though she could not speak yet, she understood him perfectly, because Draconeth were ancient beings with intelligence far beyond what their small forms suggested. She understood that this human child had saved her life with nothing but kindness in his heart, and in her own way, she made a promise to herself that she would never forget what Danny Cole had done for her. By the time Danny's mother came home, he had hidden Ember safely in the closet nest and cleaned up any evidence of his new friend. Linda poked her head into his room to say goodnight, and Danny pretended to be sleepy, even though his heart was racing with excitement. "Sleep well, baby," Linda said with a tired smile. "You too, Mom," Danny replied. After she left, Danny waited until he heard her bedroom door close, and then he crept over to the closet. Ember was curled up in the blankets, looking at him with those glowing golden eyes. "Good night, Ember," Danny whispered. "Tomorrow I will bring you more food, and maybe we can figure out where you came from." The dragon made a soft purring sound and closed her eyes. Danny climbed into his own bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to believe what had happened today. He had found a dragon, a real living dragon, and somehow he knew that his life was never going to be the same again. 3 weeks passed, and Danny became very good at keeping secrets. Every morning before school, he would wake up early and sneak food to Ember, who waited for him in the closet nest, with her tail wagging like a happy puppy. Every evening after his mother went to sleep, Danny would sit with Ember and read to her from his favorite books about knights and heroes and magical adventures. The dragon grew a little bit each day, and her scales became brighter, and her wings became stronger. And sometimes when she sneezed, tiny sparks would fly from her nostrils, which always made Danny laugh. Ember still could not speak with words, but Danny felt like he understood her anyway, because when he looked into her golden eyes, he could sense what she was feeling. When she was happy, her scales seemed to glow warmer, and when she was scared, they would turn a darker shade of blue. Danny's mother, Linda, noticed that her son seemed different lately, because he smiled more and laughed more and spent a lot of time in his room with the door closed. She figured he had found some kind of pet and was keeping it hidden, and she decided not to say anything because Danny was a good kid who deserved something to make him happy. She had no idea that the pet was a dragon from another world. On a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Danny found Ember, everything changed. Danny was lying in bed, reading a comic book, while Ember dozed in her closet nest, when suddenly the dragon's eyes snapped open, and she made a sound Danny had never heard before. It was a high, keening wail filled with pure terror. Danny jumped out of bed and ran to the closet, where Ember was pressing herself into the corner, shaking so hard the blankets were falling off her. "Ember, what is wrong?" Danny asked, reaching out to comfort her. But Ember kept making that terrible sound, and her eyes were fixed on the window. Danny turned to look, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Through the glass he could see lights descending from the sky, but they were not stars, or planes, or anything he had ever seen before. They were massive ships, 3 of them, shaped like jagged black knives, cutting through the night. The ships made no sound as they lowered toward the ground, and their surfaces seemed to absorb the moonlight, making them look like holes in the sky. Danny heard his mother scream from downstairs. He grabbed Ember and ran out of his room and down the stairs, where he found Linda standing at the front window, with her hand over her mouth. "Danny," she gasped. "What is happening? What are those things?" Before Danny could answer, a beam of bright white light shot down from the largest ship and struck the ground in front of their house. Figures began to appear in the light, and they were not human. They were tall and thin, with bodies like insects, covered in dark armor, and they had multiple limbs that ended in sharp claws and weapons that glowed with dangerous energy. There were at least 20 of them, and they moved in perfect formation surrounding the house. One of the creatures stepped forward, and it wore armor that was different from the others, with markings that suggested it was the leader. When it spoke, its voice came through some kind of translator device, making the words flat and mechanical. "Human residents of this dwelling, we are the Veth. We have tracked a dangerous creature to this location. Surrender the Draconeth hatchling immediately, and you will not be harmed. Resist, and this settlement will be reduced to ash." Linda looked at Danny, and then at the creature in his arms, and her face went pale. "Danny," she whispered, "what is that thing you are holding?" "She is my friend, Mom," Danny said. "Her name is Ember, and they want to hurt her." Linda's mind was racing, because none of this made sense, but she could see the terror in the small creature's eyes, and she could see the determination in her son's face. "Danny, give them what they want," she said. "They will kill us." "I cannot, Mom," Danny said. "She is just a baby. They already killed her mother. I cannot let them take her." The Veth commander made an impatient sound and raised one of its clawed hands. "You have 10 seconds to comply, human. 10, 9, 8. Danny held Ember tighter, and the dragon was shaking so hard he could barely keep hold of her. 7, 6, 5. Linda grabbed Danny's arm, trying to pull Ember away, but Danny would not let go. 4, 3, 2. Something inside Danny broke open like a dam, releasing a flood of emotion he could not control. "No," he shouted, "I will not let you take her." The word echoed across the field, and something impossible happened. Ember stopped shaking. The terror in her eyes changed to something else, and Danny felt a strange warmth spreading through His chest, like a fire, had been lit inside him. The Veth commander tilted its head in confusion, because it had expected the humans to surrender, or run, or beg for mercy. It had not expected a small child to defy them. "You do not understand what you protect, human child," the commander said. "The Draconeth are weapons of mass destruction. If this one is allowed to mature, it will become a threat to our entire empire. Step aside." Danny looked down at Ember, who was looking up at him with those golden eyes. He did not see a weapon. He did not see a threat. He saw his friend, who had been crying, scared, and alone until he found her. "She is not a weapon," Danny said. "She is my friend." And with those words, the universe shifted. Danny felt something click into place deep inside him, like two puzzle pieces fitting together perfectly. Ember felt it too, because her eyes went wide and her scales began to glow brighter than Danny had ever seen. The bond formed. It was something that had never happened before in the history of the galaxy, because Draconeth were ancient and proud, and they bonded with no one. But Ember had been saved by this human child who asked for nothing in return. She had been shown kindness in her darkest moment by someone who had no reason to help her. And now their souls were connected in a way that could never be broken. Power surged through the bond, flowing from Ember to Danny, and from Danny back to Ember, creating a loop of energy that grew stronger with each passing second. The Veth commander sensed something was wrong and raised its weapon. "Kill them all," it ordered. But it was too late. Ember began to grow. Her small body expanded as scales hardened into armor, and wings unfurled like great sails catching an invisible wind. She grew from the size of a cat to the size of a dog to the size of a horse to the size of a house, kept growing until she towered over everything, her massive form blocking out the stars, and her eyes burning with ancient fire. Linda Cole screamed and fell backward. The Veth soldiers opened fire, but their weapons did nothing against scales that had been forged in the hearts of dying stars. Ember looked down at Danny, who stood frozen in awe at what his friend had become. Through their bond, she spoke to him, not in words but in feelings and images and pure understanding. "You saved me," she said. "Now I will protect you." And then the dragon attacked. Ember moved faster than anything her size should have been able to move. The Veth soldiers fired their plasma weapons, and bolts of superheated energy streaked toward the dragon. But Ember swept her massive wing forward, and the blasts bounced away harmlessly into the night sky. The Veth commander screamed orders in its alien language, and the soldiers tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to run. Ember inhaled deeply, and Danny could feel the heat building inside her through their bond, like a furnace being stoked to impossible temperatures. Then she released her fire. It was not like fire from the movies, with orange and red flames that flickered and danced. This was something far more terrifying, because the flames were white and blue, and so hot that the air itself seemed to burn. The first wave of Veth soldiers vanished in an instant, their armor melting and their bodies turning to ash before they could even scream. Toward their ships, but Ember was not going to let them escape. She launched herself into the air, and the force of her takeoff created a shockwave that knocked Danny and his mother off their feet. Linda grabbed Danny and pulled him close, shielding him with her body, as debris flew around them. "What is happening?" she screamed over the roar of wind and fire. "She is protecting us, Mom," Danny shouted back. "Ember is protecting us." In the sky above, Ember descended upon the Veth ships like a hawk diving for prey. The first ship tried to rise and escape, but Ember was faster, and she slammed into it with all her weight, her claws tearing through the hull like it was made of paper. The ship exploded in a ball of fire, and Ember flew straight through the flames, emerging without a scratch. The second ship opened fire with its main cannons, and beams of energy struck Ember across her back and wings. Through their bond, Danny felt a flash of pain, and he cried out, grabbing at his shoulder, where phantom burns seemed to sear his skin. But the pain only made Ember angrier. She twisted in the air and dove toward the second ship, her jaws opening wide to reveal teeth as long as swords. She bit down on the ship's engine section and ripped it away, sending the vessel spinning out of control until it crashed into the mountainside half a mile away. The third ship tried to flee, climbing higher and higher into the atmosphere in a desperate attempt to reach space. Ember pursued her wings, beating with such force that sonic booms echoed across the valley. She caught the ship just as it was about to break through the clouds, and she wrapped her body around it, crushing the hull with her coils like a snake strangling its prey. Danny watched from the ground as the third ship fell from the sky, trailing fire and smoke, until it hit the earth with an impact that shook the ground beneath his feet. Silence. Ember descended slowly, her massive wings creating gentle gusts of wind as she landed in the field behind Danny's house. Her scales were glowing with residual heat, and smoke rose from her body, but her eyes were calm as she lowered her head to look at Danny. Through their bond, he could feel her exhaustion and her relief, and underneath it all, a deep well of gratitude that seemed to have no bottom. "Are you okay?" Danny asked, reaching out to touch her snout. Ember made a sound that was almost like a laugh, and it rumbled through the ground like distant thunder. "You ask if I am okay," she said through their bond. "You are a strange little human, Danny Cole." "You are my friend," Danny replied. "Friends check on each other." Linda Cole was still sitting on the ground, staring at the massive dragon, with an expression that was equal parts terror and wonder. She had seen many strange things in her life, but nothing had prepared her for this. Moment P. "Danny," she said in a shaky voice, "can you please explain what is happening?" Danny walked over to his mother and helped her stand up, brushing dirt and debris from her clothes. "Her name is Ember, Mom," he said. "I found her 3 weeks ago in the ravine behind the hiking trail. She was just a baby, and she was all alone and scared. Those things that attacked us killed her mother, and they came here to kill her too." Linda looked at the dragon, who was watching them with those enormous golden eyes. "She was the thing in your closet," Linda said. "I thought you had found a stray cat." "She was about that size when I found her," Danny admitted. Linda laughed, even though there was nothing funny about any of this, because sometimes laughing was the only thing you could do when the world stopped making sense. "My son has been hiding a dragon in his closet," she said. "Of course he has. Why would anything be normal in my life?" Her head, until her snout was just a few feet from Linda, and she made a soft crooning sound, almost like she was trying to say hello. Linda reached out with a trembling hand and touched the dragon's scales, which were surprisingly warm and smooth, like polished metal that had been sitting in the sun. "She is beautiful," Linda whispered. "She saved us, Mom," Danny said. "She saved both of us." Ember pulled back slightly and looked up at the sky, where the stars were still visible between the clouds of smoke rising from the crashed ships. Through their bond, Danny could sense her thinking about something, and he waited patiently for her to share it with him. "More will come," Ember finally said. "The Veth will not stop hunting me, and now they know you are connected to me. You and your mother are in danger." Danny felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed the fear aside. "Then we will face them together," he said. Ember's eyes widened slightly, because she had not expected that response. In her short life she had known only fear and loss and the certainty that she was alone in a hostile universe. But this human child kept surprising her with his courage and his kindness and his absolute refusal to abandon her. "You would risk your life for me?" she asked, "even knowing what is coming?" Danny smiled, and it was the same smile he had worn when he first wrapped his jacket around a scared little hatchling in a cold, dark ravine. "You are my friend, Ember," he said. "I am not going to let anything bad happen to you." The dragon stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something she had not done since she was a hatchling, crying in the dirt. She began to cry. But these were not tears of sadness or fear. These were tears of joy, because for the first time in her life, Ember understood what it meant to truly belong somewhere. She belonged with Danny Cole, the entire galaxy to ashes, before she let anything take that away from her. In the distance, sirens began to wail as emergency services responded to the explosions and fires that had lit up the night. Linda put her arm around Danny and looked at the massive dragon standing in her backyard. "What do we do now?" she asked. Danny thought about it for a moment, and then he laughed. "I have no idea, Mom," he admitted, "but I think things are about to get really interesting." He had no idea how right he was, because at that very moment, transmissions were flying across the galaxy, carrying news of what had happened in this small corner of Earth. A Draconeth had survived. A Draconeth had bonded with an alien species, and that species had stood against the Veth and won. The universe was about to learn the name Danny Cole, and nothing would ever be the same again. The news traveled faster than light through the quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy. Within hours of the battle in Montana, every major civilization in known space had heard the story. A Draconeth had survived the Veth extermination campaign, and that alone would have been remarkable. But what made the story truly extraordinary was that the dragon had bonded with an alien species. And not just any species, but humans, who were considered by most galactic powers to be primitive newcomers, barely worthy of notice. The Draconeth elders gathered for the first time in over 300 years to discuss what had happened. They met on a hidden world, far from the main shipping lanes, where the survivors of their once great civilization had been living in exile. There were only 12 elders left, and each one was ancient beyond human comprehension, with scales that had faded to silver and gold from centuries of life. The oldest among them was called Vorath, and he had lived for nearly 8,000 years, watching empires rise and fall like waves on an endless ocean. "This cannot be true," said one of the elders. "A Draconeth bonding with another species is impossible. It has never happened in all our history." "The reports are confirmed," Vorath replied. "The hatchling called Ember has formed a true bond with a human child. Their souls are connected in a way that cannot be broken." "But how?" another elder demanded. "We are the most ancient race in the galaxy. We have never needed anyone. We have never trusted anyone. How could a mere child accomplish what kings and emperors and gods have failed to do?" Vorath was silent for a long moment, considering the question. "Perhaps that is exactly why," he finally said. "The child did not try to accomplish anything. He simply saw a creature in pain, and offered help. He asked for nothing in return. He expected nothing in return. Sake of kindness," the elders murmured among themselves, because this was a concept they had nearly forgotten. In a galaxy where power was everything, and weakness meant death, the idea of pure selfless kindness seemed almost absurd. "We must investigate this ourselves," Vorath decided. "I will travel to Earth and see this human child with my own eyes." While the Draconeth deliberated, the Galactic Council was also in an uproar. The council was made up of representatives from over 200 species, and they governed the fragile peace that held the galaxy together. Humanity had been granted observer status in the council only 50 years ago, after they had developed faster-than-light travel and begun exploring the stars. Most council members viewed humans as insignificant, and some did not even bother to learn about them. But now, everything had changed, The implications are staggering, said the representative from the Crystalline Collective. Species of beings made entirely of living gemstone. If the Draconeth truly ally with humanity, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift dramatically. The Veth will not allow this, rumbled the ambassador from the Stone Giants, a race of massive creatures who lived for millennia. They have been hunting the Draconeth to extinction for centuries. They will see this as a threat to their empire. Then perhaps it is time someone stood against the Veth, said a smaller voice. The council turned to look at the human ambassador, a woman named Grace Mitchell, who had been quietly observing the debate. You have something to add, Ambassador Mitchell? The council chairman asked, with barely concealed condescension. Grace stood up and addressed the assembly with calm confidence. For 50 years, humanity has been told we are too young and too weak to matter in galactic affairs, she said. We have been given observer status and told to watch and learn while older. Species make decisions that affect the entire universe. She paused and looked around at the assembled beings. But one of our children showed kindness to a creature in need, and that kindness has accomplished what all your ancient wisdom could not. A Draconeth has chosen to trust us. Perhaps instead of asking how this happened, you should ask what it means. The council chamber fell silent. On Earth, the situation was becoming chaotic. The government had arrived at the Cole residence within hours of the attack, finding a confused family, a massive dragon, and the wreckage of 3 alien warships. Danny refused to leave Ember's side, and Ember refused to let anyone approach Danny, which made negotiations difficult. Military commanders wanted to contain the situation, while scientists wanted to study the dragon, while politicians wanted to figure out how to use this to their advantage. Danny's mother, Linda, stood in front of her son and faced down generals and senators and experts with nothing but her fierce determination to protect her family. My son is 8 years old, she told them. He is not a weapon or a bargaining chip or a science experiment. He found a scared baby animal, and he helped it. If you want to talk to him, you will do it respectfully, or you will not do it at all. The officials were not used to being spoken to that way, but something in Linda's eyes made them reconsider their approach. 3 days after the attack, the skies over Montana lit up again, but this time it was not an enemy arriving. Ships from a dozen worlds descended through the atmosphere, each one more strange and wonderful than the last. There were vessels made of crystal that sang as they flew, and ships that looked like living creatures with scales and fins, and ships that seemed to be made of pure light. Ambassadors emerged from each vessel, beings of every shape and size imaginable, for themselves. Danny stood in front of his house, with Ember coiled protectively around him, and he watched as aliens he could barely comprehend approached him with expressions of wonder and respect. A being made of swirling blue energy floated forward and spoke in a voice like wind chimes. We have traveled many light years to meet you, young human, it said. We wish to understand how you accomplished what you accomplished. Danny looked at all the strange creatures surrounding him, and he felt small and scared, but also strangely calm, because Ember was there, and through their bond he could feel her strength flowing into him. I did not accomplish anything special, he said. Ember was scared and alone, and I just wanted to help her. A massive stone giant knelt down so its enormous face was level with Danny's. In 10,000 years of galactic history, it said in a voice like grinding boulders, no species has ever earned the trust of a Draconeth. You must have done something. I gave her my jacket, Danny said, because she was cold, and I gave her some chicken because she was hungry, and I read her stories because she seemed sad. That is all. The ambassadors looked at each other in confusion, because they had expected something more. They had expected rituals and sacrifices and tests of strength and courage. They had not expected chicken and bedtime stories. Then a new voice spoke, and everyone turned to see a dragon descending from the clouds. It was even larger than Ember, with scales of silver and gold that gleamed in the afternoon sun, and eyes that held the weight of countless centuries. Vorath, the eldest of the Draconeth elders, had arrived. He landed with surprising grace and approached Danny, who stood his ground, even though every instinct told him to run. "So you are the one," Vorath said, studying Danny with ancient knowing eyes. "You are the human child who saved one of our own." "Yes, sir," Danny said politely, because his mother had taught him to always be respectful to elders, even if those elders were enormous dragons from space. Vorath's eyes crinkled in what might have been amusement. "Tell me, child," the elder said, "when you found Ember alone and frightened, what made you stop to help her instead of running away?" Danny thought about the question carefully before answering. "She was crying," he said, "and nobody should have to cry alone." The ancient dragon stared at Danny for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "In all my years," Vorath said softly, "I have never met anyone quite like you, Danny Cole." He turned to address the gathered ambassadors, his voice carrying across the field with the weight of millennia. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy that this child has shown the Draconeth something we had forgotten. He has reminded us that kindness requires no payment, and compassion asks for no reward. He has earned our trust in a way that no empire ever could." Vorath's gaze swept across the assembled beings. "The humans are not primitives to be dismissed," he declared. "They are something far more valuable. They are protectors, and from this day forward, the Draconeth stand with them." The words echoed across the field, and were transmitted across the stars. And in that moment, everything changed. The months that followed changed the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. News of what happened in Montana spread to every corner of known space, carried by ships and transmissions and whispered conversations in spaceports and trading posts. The story was always the same, no matter how many times it was told. A human child had found a crying dragon hatchling, and instead of running away or capturing it or trying to profit from it, he had simply wrapped it in his jacket and taken it home to keep it safe. And because of that simple act of kindness, an ancient and powerful species had chosen to ally with humanity. The Veth Empire was furious. For centuries, they had hunted the Draconeth, believing that if they could wipe out the dragons, they would eliminate the only threat to their dominance. But now the surviving Draconeth began to emerge from hiding. They came from distant nebulae and hidden moons and forgotten worlds where they had been, living in fear and isolation. They came because they had heard that one of their own had found something precious. They came because they wanted to see the humans for themselves. One by one, the great dragons arrived on Earth, and each one sought out Danny Cole. They wanted to meet the child who had changed everything. Danny was still just 8 years old, and he still struggled with his math homework, and he still helped his mother with chores around the house. But now when he walked to school, dragons flew overhead watching over him. And when diplomats and ambassadors came to Earth seeking alliances, they asked to meet with Danny before meeting with any president or prime minister. "It is strange," Danny told Ember one evening as they sat together on a hillside watching the sunset. "Everyone keeps asking me to explain what I did, but I do not really understand why it was special." Ember had grown to her full adult size now, and she was magnificent, with scales that shimmered like liquid silver, and wings that could blot out the sun. But she still loved to curl around Danny when they talked, just like she had done when she was small enough to fit in his closet. "That is exactly why it was special," Ember replied through their bond. "You did not think about whether it was special. You did not calculate what you might gain. You simply saw someone who needed help, and you helped them." "But that is just what you are supposed to do," Danny said. Ember made a sound that was something between a laugh and a purr. "Perhaps," she said, "but in a galaxy full of beings who only act when they expect something in return, your simple kindness was the rarest thing in the universe." The Veth made one more attempt to destroy what Danny and Ember had built. They gathered a massive fleet and launched an attack on Earth, hoping to crush humanity before the alliance with the Draconeth could grow stronger. But they had miscalculated badly. When the Veth Armada dropped out of hyperspace above Earth, they found themselves facing not just human ships, but a wall of dragons. Every surviving Draconeth had come to defend the world that had welcomed them. And behind the dragons stood ships from a dozen other species who had been inspired by Danny's example. The Crystalline Collective sent their singing ships that could shatter enemy hulls with harmonic vibrations. The Stone Giants sent their massive carriers, each one crewed by beings who lived for millennia and never forgot a friend or an enemy. Even species that had never agreed on anything before stood together, because if a human child could show such courage, then surely they could do the same. The battle lasted less than an hour. The Veth fleet was scattered and broken, and those who survived fled back to their territory with warnings never to threaten Earth again. The Victory representatives from across the galaxy gathered to formalize a new alliance. They called it the Coalition of the Kind, and its founding principle was simple. Any species that offered help to those in need would be welcomed. Any species that preyed on the weak would be opposed. Danny was asked to speak at the founding ceremony, and he stood before beings from 100 different worlds, feeling very small and very ordinary. "I am not sure what to say," he admitted. "I am just a kid from Montana. I do not know anything about politics or alliances or galactic affairs." He paused and looked out at the assembly. "But I do know that when I found Ember, she was scared and alone, and she needed someone to care about her. And I think maybe that's true for everyone, no matter what planet we come from, or what we look like, or how powerful we are." He reached out, and Ember lowered her massive head, so Danny could rest his hand on her. "Everyone deserves someone who cares about them," Danny said. "And maybe if we all remembered that, the galaxy would not be such a scary place." There was silence for a moment, and then applause began. It started small, but grew until the sound filled the chamber like thunder. In the years that followed, Danny grew up, but he never changed. He went to college and studied biology, because he wanted to understand life in all its forms. He traveled to other worlds and met beings that defied imagination. He fell in love and got married and had children of his own who grew up playing with dragon hatchlings in the backyard. Ember stayed by his side through all of it, watching over him just as he had watched over her. Their bond never faded because true friendship does not weaken with time. It only grows stronger. When Danny was an old man with gray hair and wrinkled skin, he liked to sit on the same hillside where he used to watch sunsets. Ember. One evening, his granddaughter came to sit with him. "Grandpa," she asked, "is it true that you changed the whole galaxy when you were my age?" Danny laughed and shook his head. "I did not change anything," he said. "I just helped a friend." "But all the stories say you are a hero," she pressed. Danny looked up at the sky where Ember was flying lazy circles among the clouds. "Anyone can be a hero," he told his granddaughter. "All you have to do is be kind." That night, Danny Cole passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was surrounded by his family and his friends, and by the dragon who had loved him for nearly a century. Ember carried his body to the top of the highest mountain on Earth, and she stood guard over him as representatives from across the galaxy came to pay their respects. The ceremony lasted for days, and beings of every shape and size traveled light years to honor the man who had taught them that kindness was the greatest power in the universe. When it was over, Ember spoke one last time to the assembled mourners. "He found me when I was lost and scared and alone," she said, "and he showed me what it meant to be loved. He did not ask for anything in return. He simply gave me his jacket and his kindness and his heart." She looked up at the stars that Danny had helped unite. "By morning on the day after we met, the skies knew his name," she said, "and now the skies will remember it forever." She spread her wings and launched herself into the air, and her cry echoed across the world. It was not a cry of sadness, it was a cry of celebration for a life well lived, and a love that would never die. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, beings of every kind looked up at their own skies and remembered the human child who had changed everything with nothing but kindness. They remembered Danny Cole, and they passed his story down to their children and their children's children. Because some stories deserve to be told forever. And this was one of them.